In the quiet town of Harmony Creek, life moved at a measured pace. Days unfolded like the pages of a well-worn book, predictable and largely uneventful. The heart of the small community, both literally and figuratively, was the dusty main street, lined with family-owned businesses that had stood for generations. Among them sat the Rusty Mug, a local bar that served lukewarm beer and strong coffee, frequented by the town's weary workers and tired farmers. And among them, though rarely with them, was Arthur. Arthur was the janitor at the Rusty Mug. He was a man of few words, his movements slow and deliberate as he swept floors, wiped down counters, and emptied overflowing ashtrays. His shoulders stooped slightly, and his face, etched with lines that spoke of years lived under harsh sun and quiet contemplation, usually held a gentle, almost distant expression. He kept to himself, arriving before dawn to clean and sometimes returning late at night to close up after the last patron stumbled out. Most folks barely noticed him, or if they did, it was only to offer a brief, often dismissive, nod. He was simply Arthur, the quiet janitor. An old man, faded into the background. But Harmony Creek, for all its peaceful facade, was changing. A shadow had fallen over the town in recent months, cast by a group calling themselves the Vipers. They weren't subtle. They were loud, crude, and seemed to take a perverse joy in making others uncomfortable. Led by a man named Marcus, a hulking figure with eyes like chips of flint and a sneer permanently etched onto his face, the Vipers swaggered through town, demanding free drinks, intimidating shop owners, and generally making life miserable for anyone who didn't bend to their will. They preyed on fear, and in Harmony Creek, fear was a currency they traded in freely. Arthur saw it all from the periphery. He saw the way Mrs. Gable, who ran the bakery, flinched when Marcus walked by. He saw the young mechanic, Tim, forced to give them protection money. He saw the fear in the eyes of the regulars at the Rusty Mug whenever the heavy door swung open and the Vipers sauntered in, their laughter echoing too loudly in the usually subdued space. He observed, he listened, and he kept cleaning. His gaze, though seemingly vacant, missed nothing. He catalogued the way they moved, their tells, their hierarchy. Old habits died hard, even after decades of disuse. One sweltering evening, the air thick with the scent of dust and stale beer, Arthur was finishing his late shift. The bar was mostly empty, just the weary bartender, Sarah, wiping down glasses. The door burst open, and Marcus entered with two of his lieutenants, a lanky man named Spike and a broad brute called Tank. They were already drunk, their voices slurring. "Hey, Sarah, pretty thing," Marcus roared, slamming a fist on the counter. "Drinks. And keep 'em coming. On the house, of course." Sarah, a young woman trying to make ends meet, visibly tensed. "We're closing soon, Marcus." Marcus leaned over the counter, his face inches from hers. "Closing when I say you're closing. Understand? Or maybe we need to teach the owner another lesson about hospitality?" He grinned, revealing a missing tooth. Arthur, who had been sweeping near the door, paused. The soft swish of the broom stopped. He watched, his expression unreadable. Spike spotted him. "Looky here. The old dust bunny is still kicking. Hey, janitor. Get us some peanuts." Arthur didn't respond. He simply stood there, broom in hand. Tank laughed, a guttural sound. "He's deaf, maybe. Hey, Gramps. Peanuts." Marcus turned his attention to Arthur, a cruel glint in his eyes. "You know, I don't like being ignored, old man. Especially by the help. Maybe you need a little motivation." He took a step towards Arthur. Sarah cried out, "Leave him alone, Marcus." Marcus ignored her. He reached Arthur and shoved him hard in the chest. Arthur stumbled back a step, but didn't fall. His expression remained calm, but something flickered deep in his eyes. "I said," Marcus growled, raising a hand as if to strike, "get us some peanuts, old man." Arthur slowly lowered his broom. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, almost unnaturally calm. "You should leave, son. This is not your place." Marcus froze, then burst out laughing. Spike and Tank joined in. "Did you hear that? The janitor is telling me to leave." Marcus wiped a tear from his eye. "That's rich, old man. Really rich. You know what? I think you need to be taught who runs this town." He swung a wild, drunken punch at Arthur's head. What happened next defied belief for anyone who only saw Arthur the janitor. Arthur didn't dodge the punch, his head moved back just enough to let it whistle past his ear. His hand, moving with impossible speed, shot out, not to hit, but to control. His fingers wrapped around Marcus's wrist, his grip like steel. The grin vanished from Marcus's face, replaced by confusion and pain. Arthur twisted Marcus's arm, applying pressure to a nerve cluster. Marcus yelled, dropping to his knees. Arthur didn't let go. Spike and Tank lunged forward. Spike, faster, tried a kick to Arthur's side. Arthur released Marcus and pivoted. His foot swept Spike's standing leg from under him with casual ease. Spike tumbled to the floor. Tank, roaring, charged. Arthur didn't meet the charge head-on. He stepped to the side, letting the brute thunder past, then delivered a short, sharp chop to the back of Tank's neck. Tank's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed in a heap. It was over in seconds. Marcus was on his knees, clutching his wrist, his face pale. Spike was struggling to get up, groaning. Tank lay still. Arthur stood perfectly still, his chest not even heaving. The silence in the bar was profound, broken only by Marcus's whimpers. Sarah stared, her mouth agape, a dropped glass shattering on the floor. Arthur looked down at Marcus. His quiet voice was deadly serious now. "I told you to leave." Marcus scrambled backwards, fear finally replacing his arrogance. You old. What the hell?" Arthur reached into his pocket and slowly pulled something out. It was a small, velvet box. He opened it, revealing a heavy, gleaming piece of metal pinned inside. It was shaped like a star, with an eagle perched above it. The Medal of Honor. Not a Medal of Valor, but the Medal of Honor. The highest military decoration for valor in combat. He held it up for Marcus to see, the bar's dim light catching the polished surface. "I earned this," Arthur said, his voice still quiet, but carrying the weight of 1,000 battles, "by facing men far worse than you. Men who thought their power came from fear and violence." He closed the box and put it back in his pocket. "They learned their lesson. Now it's your turn." Marcus, Spike, and Tank, seeing the medal and the impossible efficiency of Arthur's movements, understood, with a dawning horror, that they hadn't just tangled with an old man. They had awakened something ancient and terrible. They scrambled to their feet, leaving Tank where he lay, and stumbled out of the bar, their bravado shattered, replaced by sheer terror. Silence returned, heavy with shock. Sarah finally found her voice. "Arthur. What was that?" Arthur picked up his broom. "Just cleaning up, Sarah. Seems some trash took itself out." He resumed sweeping, the quiet janitor once more, but now, the air around him hummed with a different kind of silence. A silence of respect, and fear. Word spread like wildfire through Harmony Creek. The janitor at the Rusty Mug beat up Marcus and his goons. Alone. And he had a Medal of Honor. The whispers started, cautious at first, then growing louder. Who was Arthur? Why was he here, cleaning floors? The fear the Vipers had cultivated for months began to erode, replaced by awe, and a flicker of hope. Marcus, humiliated and furious, knew he couldn't let this stand. His authority in town, his very reputation, depended on crushing this unexpected resistance. He gathered his remaining Vipers, his eyes red with rage. That old fool thinks he can embarrass me? He thinks a piece of metal makes him tough? He's going to regret the day he ever came to Harmony Creek. We hit the bar, hard. Teach them all a lesson. And bring me that medal. Arthur knew they would retaliate. He hadn't shown the medal out of vanity, but as a deliberate statement. A line drawn in the sand. He spent the next few days not just cleaning, but watching. He observed the increased activity of the Vipers, their anxious huddles on street corners, the arrival of a few new, tougher-looking faces in town. Marcus wasn't just gathering his usual crew, he was calling in reinforcements. The problem was escalating, just as Arthur had predicted. He couldn't face them all alone. Not definitively. He was old, yes, still capable, but numbers and youth had their own brutal advantages. He needed help. Not from the terrified townsfolk, not yet. He needed people who understood his world. The world the Medal of Honor represented. Arthur made a call. It was a number he hadn't dialed in decades, a burner phone buried in a box in his rented room above the bar. The line rang twice, then a gruff voice answered. Yeah? Sam, Arthur said, his voice resonating with an authority long dormant. It's Arthur. Need your help. Got a situation. Silence stretched on the line. Sam was his old master sergeant. One of the few who had made it through the last tour. One of the even fewer who understood the weight of the things they had seen, the things they had done. Arthur? Sam's voice was rough with surprise, then laced with immediate concern. Arthur? What is it? Where are you? You okay? I'm fine, Sam. Just. Retirement got interrupted. In a place called Harmony Creek. Need a few good people. Quietly. Sam didn't ask questions. Not about what kind of situation, or why Arthur needed help. Send me the location. I'll make some calls. Give us 24, maybe 48 hours to get there. Thanks, Sam. Anytime, Arthur. Always. While he waited, Arthur began gathering information more actively. He paid attention to the hushed conversations at the bar, the worried glances exchanged by townsfolk. He noticed which businesses were being pressured the most, where the Vipers seemed to congregate. He learned they were running drugs through the town, using Marcus's intimidation to keep locals quiet and turn a blind eye. This wasn't just simple thuggery, it was organized crime sinking its roots in Harmony Creek. He also met with Sheriff Thompson, a weary man torn between his duty and the fear that Marcus had instilled. Thompson was good man, Arthur saw, but lacked the resources and the will to confront the Vipers head-on, especially if there was corruption reaching higher up the chain, which Arthur suspected. Arthur didn't reveal everything to Thompson, but he shared enough to show him the scale of the problem and gauge his reaction. Thompson was worried, deeply worried. Marcus, meanwhile, wasn't idle. The arrival of his reinforcements, a crew of 6 brutal-looking individuals clearly experienced in more than just bar brawls, emboldened him. He started a new wave of intimidation. They vandalized Mrs. Gable's bakery, smashing her display cases. They cornered Tim the mechanic, beating him badly as a warning. They drove through the main street late at night, windows down, shouting threats and firing shots into the air. They were trying to reassert their dominance, to remind Harmony Creek why they should be feared. And it was working. Fear was creeping back into people's eyes. But amidst the fear, something else was stirring. The sight of Arthur, the quiet janitor, standing up to Marcus, and the whisper of the medal, had planted a seed. A few brave souls approached Arthur, hesitantly at first. Old man Fitzwilliam, who ran the hardware store, offered supplies. Sarah, the bartender, shared details she overheard. Tim, bruised but defiant, swore he'd help however he could. They weren't fighters, not like Arthur, but they had courage, and they had numbers. They represented the heart of Harmony Creek, battered but not yet broken. We can't just let them do this, Arthur, Fitzwilliam said, his voice trembling slightly but his eyes firm. This is our town. Arthur looked at the small group that had gathered in the back room of the bar after closing. Their faces were a mix of fear and determination. He saw the potential, the spark of defiance he needed. He saw people worth fighting for. No, Arthur said, his quiet voice cutting through the tension. We can't. Tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. If you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel so you don't miss tomorrow's special episode. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, and tomorrow we have special story for you. 2 days later, a nondescript black van parked on the outskirts of Harmony Creek, behind the old, abandoned mill. 3 figures emerged. They didn't look like much at first glance: a lean, grizzled man with watchful eyes, a muscular woman with short-cropped hair, and a younger man whose face seemed oddly calm. They carried duffel bags, not suitcases. They met Arthur in the mill. Introductions were brief. Sam, the master sergeant. Maria, explosives and demolitions. Ben, communications and intelligence. Arthur's old team, or parts of it anyway. They were older now, weathered, carrying their own scars, but their eyes were sharp, their movements economical. They greeted Arthur with quiet respect, like soldiers meeting their commander after a long separation. Arthur, Sam said, a hint of a smile touching his lips. Never thought I'd see you cleaning floors. What are we up against? Arthur laid out what he knew: Marcus, the Vipers, the drugs, the reinforcements, the fear in town. He didn't exaggerate, didn't dramatize. Just facts. Sounds like a glorified street gang with some muscle, Maria commented, checking a lockpick set. They're a cancer, Arthur corrected. Spreading. And they made a mistake. They thought because I cleaned their messes, I wasn't dangerous. They confused quiet with weak. They confused respect with subservience. They confuse fear with loyalty. He paused, his gaze hardening. They need to be removed. Permanently, from this town. They spent the next few days planning. Arthur's team worked efficiently, using their old skills. Ben tapped into local communications, listening to the Vipers' chatter. Maria scouted the town, identifying choke points, potential defensive positions, likely Viper strongholds. Sam, ever the tactician, worked with Arthur on possible engagement scenarios. The plan was simple, elegant, and dangerous. They wouldn't wait for Marcus to hit the rusty mug. They would take the fight to him, but on their terms, at a time and place of their choosing. They would use Marcus's arrogance and reliance on brute force against him. They learned the Vipers' main base of operations was an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town, where they stashed their drugs and weapons. That would be the target. Meanwhile, Marcus was becoming impatient. His attempts to reassert control weren't having the desired effect. The townsfolk were scared, yes, but the seed of defiance Arthur had planted refused to die. And Marcus couldn't find the old janitor. Arthur had seemingly vanished, not seen cleaning the bar or walking his usual routes. This silence unnerved Marcus more than open resistance. He decided to force the issue. He planned a raid on the bar, bigger and more brutal than anything before. Not just vandalism, a complete destruction, a clear message that defiance meant ruin. Ben intercepted the chatter. They're moving tonight, Arthur. Looks like the bar is the target. Marcus is leading the main force. Arthur looked at Sam, Maria, and Ben. Looks like the plan just got moved up. Their warehouse? Sam asked. No, Arthur said, a glint in his eye. They're coming to us. We let them. But we don't meet them here, he gestured around the dusty mill. We meet them somewhere else. Somewhere they won't expect, and somewhere we have the advantage. He pulled out a map of Harmony Creek, spread it on a dusty table, and pointed to the old town square, a wide open space surrounded by the bakery, the hardware store, the town hall, and a few other businesses. They'll come down Main Street. Loud, fast. They expect to smash and grab at the bar. But the bar will be empty. We position ourselves here. He tapped points on the map, using the buildings for cover. We cut off their retreat. We isolate their forces. Maria traced a finger along the map. Open ground. Risky. For them, Arthur corrected. They rely on shock and violence in confined spaces. They expect resistance, but not coordinated, disciplined resistance. They expect fear, not a trap. He looked at each of them. This isn't about killing them, if we can avoid it. It's about breaking their organization, capturing Marcus and his lieutenants, and sending a clear message that Harmony Creek is no longer their playground. Sheriff Thompson is waiting. He's agreed to move in once we have them contained. Sam nodded slowly. Ambitious. I like it. What about the new muscle Marcus brought in? Ben says they're spread out, watching different parts of town, maybe expecting us to run, Arthur replied. We deal with the main group first. Isolate the head. The night air in Harmony Creek was thick with anticipation. The streets were deserted, the windows of houses dark. It felt like the town was holding its breath. Arthur, Sam, Maria, and Ben took up their positions around the square hours before Marcus was expected. They moved like ghosts, silent and unseen. Arthur took position on the roof of the hardware store, giving him a view of the main approach. From his vantage point, Arthur saw them arrive. 3 cars, driving too fast down Main Street, tires squealing slightly as they rounded the corner towards the square. Marcus was in the lead car, his silhouette visible behind the wheel. The cars pulled into the square, headlights cutting through the darkness. They screeched to a halt near the rusty mug. Marcus and his Vipers piled out, crowbars and baseball bats in hand, ready to unleash havoc. There were about 15 of them, including Spike and Tank, who looked nervous but determined. All right. Marcus yelled, his voice echoing. Let's tear this place apart. And find that old man. But the bar was dark, silent. The square was empty. Confusion flickered across Marcus's face. Then, a voice cut through the silence, calm and clear, amplified slightly by Ben through hidden speakers. It was Arthur. Looking for me, Marcus? Marcus spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. His crew looked around, bewildered. Who's there? Marcus roared, trying to regain control. Show yourself, old man. I'm here, Arthur's voice replied. And so are my friends. You shouldn't have come back, Marcus. You were warned. Suddenly, lights flared. Not spotlights, but strategically placed construction lamps, angled to blind and disorient the Vipers in the center of the square while leaving the periphery, where Arthur and his allies were hidden, in shadow. Ambush! Spike yelled. Panic erupted among the Vipers. They weren't expecting this. They were thugs, not soldiers. They were used to attacking the weak and unprepared, not facing a coordinated response. Form up! Marcus screamed, but his voice was tinged with fear. From the shadows, Sam's voice barked orders. Ben, perimeter. Maria, left flank. Arthur, center control. Engage. The fight began. It wasn't a chaotic brawl. It was a surgical strike. Sam and Ben moved like shadows, cutting off escape routes, disarming and subduing Vipers who tried to run. Maria, from her position, used non-lethal grenades, flashbangs and smoke, to further disorient and segment the enemy force. Arthur descended from the roof, dropping silently behind a group of bewildered Vipers. He didn't use weapons initially. His hands, his feet, his body were the weapons. He moved with astonishing speed and precision for a man his age. A chop to a wrist, a twist to a shoulder, a swift kick to the back of a knee. He didn't waste movement, didn't overcommit. Each action was designed to incapacitate, not necessarily to kill. He was a force of nature, a storm of controlled violence. Spike tried to tackle him. Arthur sidestepped, letting Spike sail past, then delivered a hard strike to the base of Spike's skull. Spike crumpled. Tank, surprisingly, charged again, swinging a heavy bat. Arthur caught the bat mid-swing with one hand, wrenching it from Tank's grasp with a sharp twist that sent Tank howling in pain. A swift, open-handed blow to the temple dropped the brute. Marcus watched in horror as his crew was systematically dismantled by an old man and a handful of unseen opponents. His reinforcements, waiting elsewhere in town, were out of position, unable to help. His carefully built empire of fear was crumbling around him. Driven by desperation and pure hatred, Marcus lunged at Arthur, pulling a knife. "I'll kill you, old man." Arthur met his charge calmly. He didn't try to grapple with the knife. He deflected Marcus's knife hand with a forearm block, the blade scraping harmlessly against the thick canvas of his janitor uniform. Then, using Marcus's momentum, he pivoted, sweeping Marcus's legs out from under him. Marcus hit the ground hard. Arthur stood over him, breathing steadily. Marcus lay there, beaten and defeated, the knife clattering on the cobblestones. "It was never about the medal, Marcus," Arthur said, his voice quiet again, echoing slightly in the sudden silence of the square. The sounds of his team subduing the last few remaining vipers faded. "It was about respect. Something you never earned, because you only took." Just then, sirens wailed in the distance. Sheriff Thompson and his deputies, who had been waiting nearby, moved in to secure the scene. They found the vipers disarmed, incapacitated, and ready for transport. Marcus, bruised and humiliated, was cuffed and led away. As the first rays of dawn began to paint the sky, the town square was a scene of quiet triumph. Sheriff Thompson approached Arthur, his face full of awe and gratitude. "Arthur," he said, shaking his head. I don't know what to say. We couldn't have done this without you." "Who are you?" Arthur simply smiled, a rare, gentle smile that transformed his face. "Just a janitor, Sheriff. Cleaning up a mess." Sam, Maria, and Ben joined them, standing respectfully beside Arthur. Thompson looked at them, understanding dawning in his eyes. He saw the way they held themselves, the quiet competence. This wasn't just a janitor, this was a commander, and these were his people. "Thank you," Thompson said, extending a hand to Sam, then Maria, then Ben. "All of you. You saved our town." The morning after was filled with the sounds of police activity and the quiet murmur of townsfolk emerging from their homes. The fear that had gripped Harmony Creek for months was gone, replaced by a palpable sense of relief and burgeoning hope. The vipers were gone. Marcus was in custody, facing a long list of charges. His reign of terror was over. The community, hesitant at first, began to emerge, drawn by the events of the night. They saw Arthur standing with the sheriff, talking quietly. They saw the strangers with him, people who looked capable and strong. The whispers about the janitor and the medal turned into open conversations, conversations filled with gratitude and admiration. Mrs. Gable brought fresh pastries to the square for the deputies and Arthur's team. Tim, his face still bruised, helped clear away some of the minor damage left by the Viper's earlier rampages. Old man Fitzwilliam arrived with tools to begin repairs on his storefront, a determined set to his jaw. The people of Harmony Creek weren't afraid anymore. They were united. Arthur's team stayed for a couple more days, ensuring the Viper's network in town was completely dismantled and helping Thompson understand the scope of Marcus's operation. Ben shared the intelligence he'd gathered, helping Thompson secure evidence that would stand up in court and potentially lead to arrests outside Harmony Creek. Maria helped assess structural damage and offered advice on improving town security without turning it into a police state. Sam, ever the leader, quietly oversaw everything, a watchful presence. During this time, Arthur sat on a bench in the town square, no longer sweeping, but simply observing. Townsfolk came up to him, offering thanks, shaking his hand, some just standing nearby, looking at him with a mixture of awe and a newfound sense of safety. The barrier between Arthur the quiet janitor and Arthur the man who had saved their town was dissolving. One afternoon, Sarah from the bar brought him a cup of coffee, free of charge. "Arthur," she said softly, sitting beside him. "Why? Why did you stay? Why did you do all this?" Arthur looked out at the square, where children were starting to play again, their laughter light and free. "This town. It's a good town, Sarah. Good people. They just needed someone to stand with them. Someone to remind them that courage isn't the absence of fear, but acting despite it." "But cleaning? After everything you must have done?" Arthur shrugged slightly. "Every job has its dignity, Sarah. And sometimes cleaning up is exactly what's needed. Whether it's spilled beer or spilled lives." He paused. "I came here for quiet. For peace. And for a long time, I had it. But peace isn't something you just have. It's something you have to protect." Sheriff Thompson sat with him too, his expression thoughtful. "That metal, Arthur. You must have seen some things." Arthur's gaze went distant for a moment, back to places and times filled with noise and chaos and sacrifice. "Enough," he said simply. "Enough to know that real strength isn't about how much fear you can cause, but about how much courage you can inspire." Marcus ruled by fear. He thought that made him strong. He was wrong. He was the weakest man in town. He looked at Thompson. "Respect isn't given because you demand it. It's earned. Earned by how you treat others, by what you stand for, by whether you're willing to put yourself on the line for something bigger than yourself." Sam, Maria, and Ben prepared to leave. They said their goodbyes to Arthur, quiet promises to stay in touch this time. They understood why he stayed. Harmony Creek had found its quiet guardian, and maybe, just maybe, Arthur had found a different kind of peace here, one he was willing to fight for. Life in Harmony Creek began to settle into a new rhythm. The Vipers were gone. The drug operation was shut down. Other corrupt elements connected to Marcus were rooted out, thanks to the intelligence Arthur's team provided. Sheriff Thompson, emboldened and backed by a grateful community, became a more proactive force for good. The businesses thrived without the threat of extortion. Laughter returned to the rusty mug. Arthur went back to cleaning. But it was different now. People smiled at him, waved, offered him coffee or a kind word. They saw him not just as the janitor, but as Arthur, the quiet man who had stood tall when no one else could, the man who carried the weight of battles past and the quiet strength to face the present. He was no longer just a fixture, he was a foundation. He still kept to himself mostly, a man content with his routine. But his eyes were less distant now. They held a flicker of connection, a quiet belonging. He had wanted peace, and he had found it, not in the absence of conflict, but in the victory over injustice. He had reminded a town what courage looked like, and in doing so, he had rediscovered a part of himself he thought was long buried. Harmony Creek was quiet again, yes, but it was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of peace, earned. And guarding that peace was Arthur, the janitor, the hero, the man who had reminded everyone that the most dangerous people are often the ones you never see coming. And sometimes, all it takes to earn respect is to stand up for what is right, no matter how unassuming you might seem. Up next you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.